Thank you. Our next speaker is a Toronto-based avionics designer and theatrical lighting enthusiast who fuses traditional stage design with a maker mindset to create exciting and innovative designs. He's worked on productions of all sizes and is forever seeking the perfect mint chip ice cream. Please welcome to the stage Reid Sox-Harris.
Thank you. Hello. Big thanks to the AV techs who fixed the projector for this presentation about color. It now shows the right colors, which is fantastic. Anyway, I wanted to talk a bit today about RGB. This is, of course, hackers' favorite thing. We like putting color in everything, so I thought it'd be interesting to learn a bit more about how that all works. So a bit about me. Hi, I'm Reid. I am an electrical designer by day, and energy and time permitting, I am a lighting designer by night. So what is lighting design? Well, you've probably seen the results of that. If you've ever been to a theatrical show or a live music concert, anything like that, you've seen the work of lighting design. Lighting design is where you put the lights on stage, you point them in the right place, you make sure that they turn on and off at the right point, and relevantly for this presentation, you need to make sure that they are all the right color. So to learn a little bit about how we see color, we have to go back to grade school and learn about the eye. The eye, we got two of them. They take in light from the environment and it goes through a series of focusing elements. Once it goes through the focusing elements, it gets projected onto a bunch of photodetectors. We have over 150 million of them per eye. And those photons get sent to the brain as electrical impulses. We have two types of photodetectors. On one hand, we have rods. These are very, very sensitive. They can detect down to a single photon. And these compose up to 95% of the photodetectors in our eye. On the other hand, we have cones. These are much less sensitive, 100 times less sensitive, so they're really only good for day vision. But the thing that really makes them useful is that we have three types. We'll talk about that more in a bit. So for a generic photodetector, here's how it works. All photodetectors have a probability curve. That is, if a photon hits it, what's the probability that it'll send a signal saying, I saw some light? And note that this signal is a Boolean signal. It just says, I saw something, or nothing. There's no color information, there's no magnitude even. What makes up brightness or not brightness is how many photodetectors see something and send a signal to the brain. So when you have a spectra that comes into your eye, such as this red apple spectrum here, you multiply that with the probability spectrum of your cone, or rod, and then the end result is a signal that gets sent to the brain. And again, this is purely a value. It's a single channel saying how much light or how little light. There's no color information. We only have one type of rod, that's for night vision. And so this is why night is generally colorless. You can see shapes, but not really any color because there's only one channel of information. On the other hand, we have three types of cones, short, medium, and long, and that's really useful. So if we take a completely ideal cone distribution, we can say we have roughly three cones, or we have three cones in roughly these spots, and they all have this nice, beautiful curve, all the same magnitude and widths. And the benefit of this is that in the passband of human vision, so between 400 and 700 or so, you have uniformity if you sum the probabilities. This is really useful because if you have any individual wavelength, you can bring that into a unique ratio of how much each of the three cones is stimulated. So for an example, if we have a little bit of yellow light, amber light really, this is going to trigger the medium and long cones roughly equally, and very little of this short cone here. So the brain's going to see, hey, I got some signal from the medium and I got some signal from the long, about the same amount. That means that the color's somewhere in between those two peaks. It's probably yellow. Now, this works great, but there are some downsides. Because you're taking an complex input spectrum and downsampling it to only three values, you lose some information. So for example, if we do the same experiment but with a little bit of green light and a fair bit more red light, well, the ratios actually work out to roughly the same. And this concept is called metamerism, where if you have two unique input spectrums and they come down to the same trichromacy values or same ratio between the three cones, then our brain sees them as the same color. So we can extend this idea across the spectrum, and instead of only a few types of wavelengths, we can say these three. We have some blue light, we have some green light, and we have some red light. And this is really handy because this gives you almost direct control of each of the cones, which means you can directly influence what your trichromatic values are, which gets sent to the brain. So you've essentially bypassed our complex world and got a straight link into how we see color. This is pretty cool. Now, of course, so far this has all been in ideal situations. One such non-ideality is that you can't really get perfect spectral light, like a single frequency. You can only really do that with lasers, and staring into lasers is not recommended for a variety of reasons. So instead, the closest thing we have that is safe are LEDs. LEDs have a little more bandwidth, so they're less ideal than lasers, but they're pretty good. And then when we put that on our ideal cone spectrum, you can see that it's still pretty good. There is a little overlap here. So for example, this blue light overlaps the medium cone a little bit, which means you can never only influence the short cone. You always will have a little overlap with medium, so you can't generate the colors that would be over here, like the very deep blues or the very deep reds and a couple other ratios in between. That's just kind of one of the limitations of RGB. And by the way, note that while the cone distributions are colored blue, red, and green, we call them short, medium, and long, and we'll see why in a second, because one major non-ideality that we haven't talked about so far is that the actual cone response looks more like this, and it's kind of a mess compared to that beautiful ideal curve. They're different widths, they're overlap all over the place. The long cone randomly shows up in the blue section, and so that's why if you hear them referred to as red, green, and blue cones, that's not actually quite accurate. The short cone, yes, is blue. The medium cone is green. The long cone is more of a yellow-green, and that's ignoring this whole thing here. So short, medium, and long, they're colored red, green, and blue just for convenience. So when we superimpose the actual spectrum of RGB light, this starts to get really hard to understand. Everything's overlapping, it's kind of confusing. So what some very good mathematicians did is they realized that what we really care about is the ratio between the three cones. So what you can do is similar to if you take a ratio of two numbers, you can get one number, the fraction, and you lose the magnitude of the original numbers. Well, you can do the same thing with three numbers. If you take the ratio of three numbers, you can get a pair of numbers while losing that magnitude. So that's what happened. And the International Commission for Illumination, CIE, I think it's a French thing, in 1931 did this math, did some additional adjustments, and got this. CIE 1931 chromaticity diagram, also known as the horseshoe. Here we have pure spectral wavelengths along the edge, so that's the limit of human vision from 390 to 700 or so. And all the colors in between, or chromas rather, are the colors that we can see. Now, I specify chromas because this is, when we did that ratio thing, we lost a whole axis. There's no longer lightness and darkness, and that's actually really important for human vision. So what this graph shows is not necessarily all the colors we can see, but really if two spectra can converge and look the same when they go into our eyes. So going back to RGB, if we plot these on the graph, we have RGB pretty close to the edge because they're almost pure spectral. And if you were to connect the dots, you get a gamut. That's all of the colors that the RGB can create. And there's a lot of different gamuts. Here's three common ones, some of which you've probably heard of. A lot of these are based in the film and photography industries because the benefit of standardizing gamuts is that you have the ability to edit something on your fancy, shiny new OLED monitor and then send it to your grandparents who are still rocking that 1995 CRT, and the colors will be the same because you artificially constrained your color space to be more standardized. So we were able to see that in all of those gamuts, white was in the middle. So you can generate white using RGB. Cool, right? And the sun is also more or less white. So they're the same thing, right? And yes, when you're staring directly at them, please don't stare at the sun. But the issue really comes when we're interacting with the more complex world around us. We're bouncing light off of things and looking at that. That's how we usually interact with the world. So for any given object, there's a reflectance curve. An apple, for example, will reflect this light when given a uniform, when you bounce a uniform light off of it. Mostly red, a little bit of green, no blue. It makes sense, it's red apple. And similarly, the sun and all other illuminants will have an output spectra. The sun's a little bit more blue than it is red, And we've made a standard, it's called D65, standard illuminant, because sometimes the sun, there's clouds, or depending on where you are, it'll be different. So this is a standard illuminant. And when you combine the two, you take the spectra of the apple, spectra of the sun, multiply them together, and you get, it's an apple. It looks correct. And the spectra is a little different than that of the apple. There's a few more dips and peaks than there were before, but it more or less looks the same. This is a good rendering. There's no really altering of the source or the object's spectra. Now, let's do the same experiment for RGB. RGB has a much more peaky spectrum. There's gaps, there's different widths and heights. And so when we do the same math, well, it's still red. It's very much still an apple, but its colors just don't look quite right. If you compare the two, you can really see the difference. You lose a lot of information when you bounce RGB off of something, because you only get the RG or B spectrum back. The apple looks super red because you're bouncing the red LED off, and you lose kind of the more subtle coloring and the speckling and stuff. I wouldn't want to buy that apple at a store. So, okay, that's not great. Poor rendering is not something we want, especially in theater when we're not lighting apples, we're lighting people and sets with all very complex colors. So we kind of have two issues here. One, rendering, which we just talked about. The other is gamut. You can't hit all of the colors inside the human vision with RGB. There's spots that aren't able to be hit. And again, in theater, we really like some of the colors outside. So for example, the deep blues and kind of purples are really good for like emotions and nighttime and filling in shadows. And deep red is a really important part of lighting skin tones. So these are both issues that we need to contend with. So how do we go about fixing it? So one answer is using incandescent lights. And this has been mostly phased out in the household use, but still very prevalent in theater because incandescent lights give a very uniform spectrum. And then you can put color filters in front of it to change the color. I'm being lit by an incandescent light right now. And there are downsides. There's a reason that they don't exist in the home anymore. They're hot, they suck up a lot of power, don't actually generate a lot of light relative to the amount of energy they take. But they're cheap, they're uniform, not bad. Now, this is making a white spectrum, so why don't we do the same thing with an LED? We have white LEDs, and we do. White LEDs are actually blue LEDs in a phosphor trench coat. You take the spectrum of a blue LED, put a phosphor in front of it, and then it will re-emit some of the energy down spectrum as green and red to kind of get more whiteness. And different phosphors will result in more evenness or different tints, either a warm tint or a cool tint. And this is really useful. There are downsides, of course. This is not a flat spectrum still. You can get better phosphors that will be more flat, that will give you a better color rendition value, such as a higher CRI value. But it's still not amazing, and you can't take the filters from tungsten lights or incandescent lights because they're calibrated for a blackbody emission, not a LED emission. So, okay, white's maybe not the perfect solution. So what else can we do? Well, let's start with RGB again, because we like RGB. There's a big gap between green and red, so let's fill that in with maybe some lime. Lime is a phosphor emission similar to white, so it's much more wideband. Now let's tackle between blue and green. We can add some cyan light. And then, okay, there's still a little gap between red and greenish, so we can add a phosphor yellow, and we're getting pretty close. And note that when we want a flat plot, it's okay that there's a whole bunch of peakiness at the top, because we can calibrate that out. We can just make certain lights dimmer or brighter to make that a flat line. This is just using the maximum value of each of the LEDs. Now, one last thing we can do is add some gamut increasing lights, so some indigo and some deep red. And this allows us to get those indigos and deep reds that we really like in theater. The end result is this. It's a 8 emitter array, and this is what's kind of state-of-the-art in the theatrical industry right now. Source 4 LED Series 3 uses a very similar array, and you get quite a nice gamut out of it. I tried to do something similar with my Metamer SAO, which I have right here. It has a pretty bad spectrum, but that's just because manufacturers don't really care about having good spectral content in indicator lights, but still a good idea of how it is. One thing I really like is there are teal LEDs in this, which is not a color of light you have probably seen come out of an LED before. And in fact, because you're seeing this on a projector, which is an RGB projector, that's not the accurate color. If you're watching the live stream, the badge isn't going to have the correct color. The only people that can see this beautiful teal light are right here in front of me. Aww. So in summary, where does this land us? If you need an LED and you're not illuminating something, RGB is king. RGB is still king because it works so well with our cones. If you are illuminating something, it gets a little more complicated. If you only need white, white LEDs are very good. Get something, if you want to make something look how it is, use a white LED, get something with a good color rendering index. If you only need saturated colors, if you're like lighting a rave or something or doing some fun artwork, RGB is still pretty good. Maybe add an indigo or an amber array to get a wider gamut, but they'll do just fine. If you need both white and colored lights, but not pastels, so kind of like white-ish colors, you can do what the smart lighting industry does and use RGB and then also a warm white and a cool white LED. You can kind of have a white mode and a not white mode, a party mode, but you can't affect the white so much. You can't get pastels because it'll be super peaky. And you'll run into the same issues as RGB. So if you need pastels, then you're really left with three options. You can either go incandescent, and that's what the theatrical industry has been doing for years and will probably continue to because there's not so much money in the arts, so you can't upgrade very easily. If you have a little bit of budget, RGB plus lime is a really good option. That lime really helps the spectra to be a little flatter, and just the one extra emitter isn't that much more expensive. And then if you have all the money, just start throwing emitters at it. You'll get a beautiful spectrum, and everyone's going to be happy. So I hope that you learned a little something about light. I hope it was illuminating, you could say. If you're interested in some more scientific books about color theory instead of artistic books, I highly suggest these. And that's all I got. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.